David Bonderman, he may not be a household name for everyone,
Well,
but his impact, in finance, sports, and even politics was pretty significant.
yeah,
He passed away at 82 recently, left behind quite a legacy worth taking a closer look at.
definitely. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who, was constantly in the headlines.
No, not at all. He preferred to operate kind of behind the scenes, but he was incredibly influential.
Fascinating. So how did he wield that influence?
With a really sharp intellect and this almost uncanny ability to make smart decisions, even in really, really complicated situations.
That's interesting. You don't see that every day, especially in the high-stakes world of private equity.
Speaking of which, that's where he made his mark. Bonderman, along with Jim Coulter, co-founded TPG.
Oh, TPG.
Yeah, a giant in the private equity world, manages billions and billions in assets.
I mean, their early investments in companies like Airbnb and Spotify, that shows some serious foresight.
It really does. They had this knack for identifying not just trends, but the underlying forces driving those trends.
So they saw the potential in Airbnb because they understood the changing landscape of travel,
Yeah.
a desire for authentic experiences.
Exactly. And with Spotify, they saw how digital streaming was changing the music industry, how people were consuming music.
It wasn't just about being on top of trends. It was about understanding how consumer behavior was changing, how the culture was shifting.
Absolutely. It was a very special kind of vision, but it wasn't all just intuition. They were really, really meticulous in their research,
So they were analyzing market data, looking at the competitive landscape, all that.
assessing the long-term viability of the businesses they were investing in, really doing their homework.
So it sounds like a balance of intuition and hardcore analysis.
You got it.
Fascinating.
Mm.
So before we get too deep into TPG, let's go back a bit.
All right.
Let's rewind to Bonderman's early career. He started out as a lawyer, but things took a really interesting turn.
Yeah, when he started working for the Bass family in Texas.
The Bass family. Oh, one of the wealthiest families in Texas, deeply connected to the oil industry.
Through Sid Richardson, right?
Sid Richardson, the legendary wildcatter. It's like a story straight out of classic Texas.
It really is. Wildcatters, for those who don't know, were these oil prospectors. They drill in totally new, unproven areas.
The risk takers.
Huge. They could strike it rich, but they faced so many challenges.
Richardson was one of the lucky ones, or maybe just really skilled. He built an incredible fortune, which the Bass family inherited.
Right.
So here's Bonderman stepping into this world of Texas oil wealth, pretty far from the courtrooms.
Yeah, a totally different world.
So what was his role managing the family fortune?
Well, he and Jim Coulter, they were pioneers of this strategy called leveraged buyouts.
Leveraged buyouts. I've heard the term, but never fully understood it.
It's complicated for sure.
Do you break it down for us?
It basically involves using borrowed money to buy companies, and the assets of the company you acquire become the collateral for the loan.
Sounds like a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Very much so. One of their most well-known leveraged buyouts was when they acquired Continental Airlines in the 80s.
The 80s, that was a tumultuous time for the airline industry.
For sure. But that move really cemented Bonderman's reputation, showed he was a financial mastermind.
To make that a little clearer for our listeners, can you give an example of how a leveraged buyout works, maybe on a smaller scale?
Okay, sure. Think of it like buying a house. You usually don't pay the whole price up front.
Right, you get a mortgage.
Exactly. And the house itself is the collateral. That's kind of like what Bonderman and Coulter were doing, but instead of houses, it was entire companies.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for explaining that. So it seems like Bonderman wasn't afraid to take risks.
No, not at all. He had an incredible appetite for risk, but it was calculated, always backed up by thorough research, deep understanding of the businesses he was looking at.
Like with Continental Airlines, he saw an opportunity in a volatile industry, and his calculated risk paid off.
Absolutely. He didn't just jump in blindly. So we see Bonderman, the legal mind, turned private equity titan, not afraid of risk, but approaching it strategically.
Always analyzing, always with a deep understanding of the market. But there's more to his story than just finance.
Oh, yeah, for sure. He was a huge sports fan, loved basketball in particular.
Right, he's a minority owner of the Boston Celtics. Talk about a legendary team.
With a huge dedicated fan base. He wasn't just in it for the money, it was a real passion for him. And his impact in the sports world went beyond basketball.
Oh, tell me about it. He was instrumental in bringing professional hockey back to Seattle.
With the Seattle Kraken.
Huge for Seattle, a dream come
A
true.
long time coming. It shows his ability to spot opportunities not just in business, but in sports and entertainment too.
He understood how people connect with their teams, how sports can bring a city together.
Totally. It's clear Bonderman's success came from his smarts, calculated risk-taking, and a genuine love for what he was doing. Revitalizing an airline, investing in groundbreaking companies, bringing joy to sports fans. But like anyone with that kind of influence, his journey had its controversies too.
Like the Uber incident.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
it sparked a lot of debate about corporate culture and how women are treated in the tech industry.
Yeah. And it all went down in 2017 during a meeting about sexism at Uber. Ariana Huffington, who was on the board at the time, made this point about how having one woman on a board often leads to more women being included.
It's an interesting idea, the idea that representation can actually lead to more inclusion.
Right. And then Bonderman, who was also on the board, made a joke that didn't quite land right.
He implied that having more women on a board would just lead to more talking.
Not a great look.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And it came across as insensitive, dismissive of the very issue they were trying to address.
It showed how important awareness and sensitivity are, especially when you're in a position of power.
Especially in a public forum.
And of course, Bonderman resigned from the board after that and issued an apology, admitting his comment was inappropriate.
It did spark a broader conversation, though, about corporate culture, unconscious bias, and building more inclusive environments.
It did. And it wasn't just about one person's bad judgment. It reflected larger problems within the tech industry and the need for real, meaningful change.
Definitely. So we see a man of immense talent and achievement, but also susceptible to missteps. It highlights how important it is to constantly learn and be aware, even for people at the top of their game.
Yeah, a good reminder that even the most successful people make mistakes and that those mistakes have consequences. It also highlights the need for accountability and constant self-reflection, especially for those in positions of power.
Absolutely. His resignation from the board and his apology showed that he was willing to own his mistake and take responsibility.
A crucial step in any kind of growth and redemption. The incident did, however, spark a wider conversation about the culture in Silicon Valley and the tech industry at large, and really made people think about unconscious bias and the need for more diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. It brought to light the systemic challenges that women and underrepresented groups face in those industries and how much change is needed.
Bonderman's story, with all its highs and lows, gives us a lens to examine leadership, success, and how society is constantly changing.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that even the most successful people are products of their time, shaped by what's considered normal and the biases of their era. And it makes us think about our own beliefs and actions and if we're actually contributing to a more just world.
It does.
It really makes you think about, how we all contribute to making things better.
It does. Bonderman's political journey is interesting, too. He was a longtime supporter of George W. Bush, but then endorsed John Kerry in the 2004 election.
That shift in political allegiance, it's pretty fascinating. He actually gave an interview where he talked about being disillusioned with the Bush administration.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this famous quote where he said, Bush was, and I quote, turning out to be the worst president since Millard Fillmore, and that's probably an insult to Millard Fillmore.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
He also criticized Bush for dividing the country.
It's a stark contrast to his earlier support for Bush. What do you think caused such a dramatic change in his political views?
Well, it seems like a few things contributed. The way the Iraq War was handled, the growing political divide, and the sense that the Bush administration wasn't keeping its promises.
It's pretty remarkable that he was willing to openly criticize a president he had supported before.
It really speaks to his independent thinking, his willingness to stand up for what he believed in.
It shows intellectual honesty and a willingness to reevaluate his beliefs based on what was happening around him.
Right. Not just sticking with something, because that's what he always believed. But, let's move on to a lighter side of Bonderman.
Okay, sure.
He was known for throwing some pretty extravagant parties.
Oh, yeah. Those legendary bashes. Those were the stuff of legend.
Well, he had this larger-than-life personality, and his birthday parties really reflected that. For his 60th, he flew the Rolling Stones to Vegas for a private concert.
Rolling Stones.
And for his 70th, Paul McCartney, these weren't just parties, they were events.
Can you imagine being a guest at one of those?
It must have been an experience.
Definitely. So we see this side of Bonderman, this guy who knew how to enjoy himself, how to celebrate his success, but he didn't really flaunt his wealth publicly.
He really didn't. It's like he got more satisfaction from the accomplishment itself, not the recognition that came with it.
That's an important distinction. It speaks to a certain humility.
You don't always see that with people who are that successful.
No, you don't. It reminds us that real success isn't about showing off your wealth or your fame. It's about the impact you make and what you leave behind.
Well said. And, he was able to navigate all these different worlds, finance, sports, even politics. It shows how multifaceted he was. He had so many interests.
Yeah, he didn't limit himself to just one area.
He wasn't content with being an expert in just one thing. He wanted to make a difference in multiple areas.
It's like he had this insatiable curiosity, always wanted to learn more, experience more.
And he wasn't just dabbling, he was making real contributions in each of those areas.
Whether it was running a private equity firm, owning part of a basketball team, or helping bring hockey back to Seattle, his involvement was significant.
Absolutely.
It's encouraging. It shows that we don't have to limit ourselves to just one path in life. We can explore different avenues, have different passions, and make a difference in all sorts of ways. Bonderman's life proves that you can embrace those diverse interests and pursue them with passion and dedication.
He really did. But of course, as we've talked about, his journey wasn't always smooth sailing.
That Uber incident really casts a shadow. It makes you question his judgment, his sensitivity to issues like gender equality.
It's a tough one. It reminds us that even incredibly successful people can stumble, and those stumbles can have big consequences.
It also emphasizes the importance of accountability and being able to look inward, especially for those in powerful positions.
I mean, his decision to resign from the board and apologize does suggest that he was willing to admit his mistake and to take responsibility.
It's essential for growth and for redemption.
It is.
However, the whole incident sparked a much bigger conversation about the culture in Silicon Valley and the tech industry in general.
It did. It raised concerns about unconscious bias and the real need for more diversity and inclusion.
It brought to light the challenges women and underrepresented groups face in those industries. It showed how much work still needs to be done.
Yeah, it's a complex situation. Bonderman's story, with all its highs and lows, gives us a lot to think about leadership, about success, and about how our society is constantly evolving.
Exactly. It reminds us that even the most accomplished individuals are influenced by the times they live in, by what's considered normal, and by the biases of their era. It challenges us to really look at our own beliefs and actions, and to make sure we're contributing to a more just and equitable world. So as we wrap up our look at David Bonderman's life, what do you think his most lasting legacy will be? What will people remember about him years from now?
That's a good question. He'll be remembered for his financial success, of course, his role in shaping the private equity industry, those bold investments that transform companies like Airbnb and Spotify. But his impact went beyond just the financial world.
Right, he wasn't just a one-dimensional figure.
His love for sports, his philanthropic work, his involvement in politics, they all contributed to this really complex and fascinating legacy. He was driven, really dedicated to leaving his mark on different industries and communities.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Whether in business or in politics, he always spoke his mind.
He was never one to shy away from a debate. That independent streak, combined with his intelligence and maybe a bit of that Texas boldness, made him a powerful figure. He wasn't easy to categorize. He was full of contradiction.
Which made him even more interesting, right? So his story ultimately shows us the potential we all have, the ability to accomplish great things with hard work, determination, and a willingness to take risks.
Yeah, but it also reminds us that even those who reach the top aren't immune to making mistakes.
Right. His legacy has both triumphs and controversies, successes and setbacks, and it's all part of his story.
It's a story that offers lessons for everyone, no matter what path you're on.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our discussion about David Bonderman, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from it? What's the most important lesson we can learn from his journey?
I think the biggest takeaway is that life is all about continuous learning. It's about evolving and embracing new challenges. Bonderman never stopped challenging himself, always seeking out new experiences and expanding his horizons.
It makes you think about how the world is constantly changing, and to really thrive, we need to be adaptable, curious, and open to learning new things.
He really understood that growth comes from getting outside your comfort zone, taking those risks, and diving into the unknown.
He never stopped exploring, never stopped challenging himself, always searching for new adventures. That's quite a legacy.
It is. It encourages us to approach life with that same curiosity, that same determination, and to really enjoy the journey, even with all its ups and downs.
David Bonderman's story shows us what the human spirit is capable of, the incredible things we can achieve, and how important it is to live a life that's meaningful and fulfilling.
Absolutely. It's a life worth reflecting on.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to say about David Bonderman. A truly fascinating life, full of complexities and contradictions. He definitely left his mark on the world.
He did. A remarkable journey.
Goodbye, and see you in the next video.